All right, guys, welcome to Question of Strength. Basically, my space on the internet where I talk about my life, my training, my nutrition, and then answer your questions. Now, whether this is interesting or not is entirely dependent on you. I mean, no pressure. I mean, if I don't get any good, you don't get good answers. So, obviously, post as many questions as you can on the chat menu on the right of your screen. Any question related to training, nutrition, supplementation, so on and so forth, I will answer. The only topic I don't like to answer is injury. I'm not an expert in fixing injuries or treating around injuries. As much as possible, I try to avoid injuring people. And it's never been an interest of mine. I always refer out when I come to athletes with injuries. It's not my lane. I'm a trainer. I'm not a physical therapist. So, but besides anything goes. Uh, Before we get to your questions, just a little update that might interest you or not, but I do have some time to fill. Regarding my training, I started. I changed my training a little bit. I'm still focusing on hypertrophy using an effort-based approach, meaning that I use a low volume of training. Typically, I use a split of push, pull, legs, and arms. On the push and pull workout, I don't work the arm portion of the push or pull. I only do chest and shoulders on push, and I do only upper back, traps, and lats on the pull day. Then I have my arm day. I started out by doing triceps on push day and biceps on pull day, but what I found is that like arms are my weak point at the moment. I mean, my triceps used to be a strong point, but because of some nerve issue, I lost some triceps, and my biceps have always been a weak point of mine. And when I train the triceps at the end of a push workout or the biceps at the end of a pull workout, I just did not get an optimal stimulation. I actually need to do the arms by themselves to progress optimally. I really hate doing arm workouts. So for example, I did a arm workout, um, but I also use stretching and noted stretching for the lower body for the reason I'm about to tell you. In the meantime, I might also like do Olympic lifting and jumping on that day for reasons I will explain in a minute. But typically, I have 4 to 6 exercises in a workout. I have 1 or 2 work sets per exercise. For me, a work set is something that is to proximity to failure. So, for example, if I stop 3 reps short of failure, to me that's not really a work set. That would be more of a feeler set or preparation set. So, my top set is typically the heaviest set that I'm going to be doing on that exercise, and I'm targeting 5 to 8 reps. So fairly heavy weight, and I'm doing that set to failure. Sometimes I will add an intensifier to that set. So I might do a rest pause, I might do a drop set, I might add lengthened partials in the bottom, I might add isodynamic hold at the bottom. For example, that would be some methods I'm using to intensify that work set. If I'm not utilizing an intensifier, I will do a back off set after the work set. So if my work set is only going to failure, then I will do a second work set, like 2 or 3 minutes later, which uses roughly 20% less weight. And I'm doing as many reps as I can, like not necessarily to failure, but I would say like 1 rep short of failure. But the top set is definitely to failure. If I'm using an intensifier on the top set, I will not do that back offset. The back offset is simply to get enough maximally effective reps for that muscle. If I'm doing post failure method on the top set, I don't require that. So normally it's 4 to 6 total exercises in a workout. Now, regardless of the training approach I'm using, whether it's effort based, load based, or volume based, I tend to stick to 4 to 6 exercises. The only thing that will change is the number of work sets I'm utilizing. I find that more than that, you just lose focus. I mean, and even 6 to me, it's a lot of exercises. I have always preferred to do fewer exercises and to really have the higher quality on those movements. And the reason why I was having problem building the triceps and biceps when they were on the push and pull day is because of the accumulated central fatigue from the work on the big muscle. So every time you do a set, you do create central fatigue. Yeah, the recovery period allow you to recover some of that function, but after you've done, let's say, 4 or 5 exercises with some set like are very hard, you will still have accumulated some form of central fatigue. Central fatigue is what? It's a weakening of the central drive from the nervous system to the muscles. So it's essentially what activates and recruit the muscle fibers and make them produce tension. The higher the drive, the stronger the drive is, the easier it is to recruit the high threshold motor unit. They're called high threshold for a reason. They need a high level of excitatory signal to get recruited. And these high threshold motor units are the fast twitch motors, those that are the most growth prone and also will gain the most strength. So as I build central fatigue from exercise to exercise, what happens is when I'm at the tricep or bicep exercise or exercises, I'm just not fully capable of recruiting the fast twitch fibers as well as if they were done at the beginning of the workout. Now, I could have decided to start the workout with a tricep or a bicep exercise. That would have fixed that problem, but that would have likely negatively affected my performance on the big pressing exercise and big pulling exercises. So I figured, well, doing an arm workout is the less bad strategy to fix that issue. And anyway, I do believe that you need some lower stress workouts in a week. Just to help you to recover. So that workout arms is certainly that. Okay, so the reason I'm changed my training a bit because I started doing karate with my son. Jaden started doing karate last year. I actually wanted him to do BJJ, but he was 4, and you can't. I haven't found a school where they can teach BJJ at the age of 6. So already, I found a school where he could attend. So he started that, and he loves that. So I decided to join in because I want to do something with my kids. So twice a week, I'm doing karate, and I'm really not good at it right now because I'm a motor moron. So all the coordination patterns are kind of new to me. I have also the tendency to use more of a boxing stance because I know boxing a lot more. Uh, so me being me being the excessive person that I am, already equipped my own gym with all kinds of striking equipment. Actually received another one today, and every day I'm doing 1 hour of technical practice, either striking or the techniques I'm learning in karate classes. Uh, and I also found that I lack lower body mobility in some movements. I'm really good at squatting full squat, but oddly enough, that's not really going to translate into kicking. So I am doing lots of lower body stretching. Now, because I hate stretching, what I do is on my easy workout, like the arm workout today, I'm doing stretches between my sets of biceps and triceps exercises. And I will do a small amount of stretching before my technical practices. As far as what stretching I'm using a blend of the Relax into Stretching by Pavel Sasulin and also loaded stretching, which is something I've been using for decades with athletes. I've written about it on T Nation, probably 2 or 3 articles. So if you look for loaded stretching or stretch to build muscle on the search option on T Nation, you're going to find lots of information about that. So it's something I'm doing mostly for the hamstrings and also for the adductors because I also suffer from an adductor issue that I still need to fix. So that's pretty much where it's at. In 2 or 3 weeks, we're actually going to start, my son and I, boxing classes. A friend of mine is a boxing coach, so he's going to give us private lessons twice a week. So that's going to be a pretty full week for us. But we've already started doing like boxing, and it's cool because he's only 5. I can win pretty much all the time, but I'm probably not going to be winning for long. Anyway, that's what we're doing right now. Now let's get to your questions, guys. Sorry about bothering you with my life. All right. So first question: in the Eternal Warrior diet, I understand the benefit of low calories and carbs on off days for longevity. But don't you need more nutrition on off days to recover from the previous day as well as prepping for the next day? Well, someone has been reading my article, so kudos on you. You're probably referring to an article I wrote called Turn Rest Days into Growth Days, in where I mentioned that you should see the rest days as a way to recover optimally from the stress you impose on the previous day and also to fully fuel your body for the workout to come. That's certainly the approach I recommend most of the time, especially when performance and growth is the main goal. So, for example, when I train athletes, we typically train on a Monday, Wednesday, Friday schedule with lifting. So the Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday, Saturday are off days. Sometimes on Saturday we do like an easier gap workout. Okay, so certainly the Tuesday, Thursday, Sunday are off days. So the goal of these days is to feed the body enough so that the next day's big workout is going to be optimized. So kudos for you remembering what I wrote, and I stand 100% behind that. If the goal, main goal, is performance and growth. Now, when I'm trying to get someone leaner, or in that case, increase health and longevity, I will use the opposite approach. I will use the off days, which are in the Eternal Warrior. It's not really an off day because I do recommend doing cardiovascular training, probably like zone two cardio. Fairly low intensity. I would probably shoot 420 beats per minute, maybe 125 for 30, 45 minutes. It could be also long distance carries, like walking with a little backpack or weight vest, and doing mobility work, because mobility is something that you do lose with age, or so I found when I started doing karate. But it's part of the Eternal Warriors system. You need to improve every physical capacity that you lose with aging, including mobility. Now, the whole purpose of Eternal Warrior is also to put you in the best state to not only get the visual effect that you like, but also and improve the performance of every single physical capacities that you tend to lose as you're getting older. It's also to make you healthier, leaner. I believe that as you're getting older, your body size should decrease. That doesn't mean necessarily that you should lose your muscle, but certainly having a lighter body imposes less stress on the cardiovascular system, as well as other systems in your body. For example, I mean, people think that whether it's fat or muscle, more weight is just more stress on the cardiovascular system. If anything, the muscle and fat both require blood flow and stuff like that. And obviously, the heavier you are, the more demanding your daily physical activities are, and it takes a toll on your heart cardiovascular system. So I do believe that as you get older, you should strive to lower your body weight. If you don't want to lose muscle, that means losing body fat. I also believe that if you want to optimize your hormonal system as you're getting older, or at least prevent the unpleasant changes that can come with aging or decrease them, getting leaner will help you that. It will help you stay insulin sensitive. It will decrease the conversion of the testosterone you're producing into estrogen. The fatter you are, the more you aromatize testosterone into estrogen. So one of the main goals of the program is actually to get you leaner while improving physical capacities. And when I'm trying to get someone leaner, the choice is, do I reduce calories overall, which is certainly something you could do. I mean, if you want a simple approach, you should have like a slight deficit on pretty much every day of the week. That's the easiest way to do it. But that will obviously negatively impact pretty much every workout, at least in the long run. Our second approach would be to use low calorie days, or what I would call control days. In that case, the Tuesday and Thursday and Sunday, for example, where because you're less physically active, as far as high intensity effort goes, you need less fuel on those days, and you can use those days to reduce carbs and calories so that you can have your calorie deficit there, allowing you to keep a slight surplus on the actual workout days. So that might not be perfect to maximize performance, but because you have a higher calorie intake on the workout day, I would put more of these carbohydrates and calories after the workout so you can facilitate recovery. So you still get most of the recovery done in that case. The strategy really depends on your main goal. In which case, here it's getting leaner, also getting healthier. So that's the best way to do it, in my opinion. Also, remember that when your calories are low, especially if you use something like an intermittent fasting approach or a very low carbs approach, you will get more AMPK release, which is a very good anti-aging enzyme. All right. Hi, coach. Hi. I'm a type 3 person. Should I work out about 2 hours and go heavy every set? Nobody should do that. Like literally, no one should train 2 hours and go ahead. I mean, unless you're taking like 10 minutes break. I mean, let's assume you're resting, let's say 2-ish minutes between sets. Okay, that's just going to make the calculation fairly easy for me. I'm not math inclined. Let's say that your set and the whole prep of your set takes a minute. Every set rest takes you 3 minutes. In 2 hours, that gives you time to do that's what 60 minutes divided by 2, 30 sets, like 60 sets. It would be 60 heavy sets. Assuming that many of those are warm up sets, let's say it's going to be 40 heavy sets. That's just way too much stress on a human body. You look at the strongest people in the world, the most muscular people, very few do that amount of volume, and none of them are natural. Okay. Also, from your name, and I'm going to make an assumption here. From your name, you probably have a smaller bone structure slash tendons, ligaments. So you're having a smaller structure makes the body less resilient to very heavy loading. I'm not telling you not to use heavy loading. I'm telling you that a large amount of loading, of heavy loading, could very easily lead to injuries and overstress of your body. Uh, and again, and I understand your question. It's changing your body is it's an emotional thing. Okay, it's an emotional thing. You look at your body. You want to change your physique, and you want to change your physique right now. So in your mind, you're willing to do the most extreme approaches to get the gains you want. And I fully understand that because that's the way my brain works too. I need uh, to really talk to myself to avoid falling into the extremes myself. So, for example, I just started karate, as I mentioned earlier. Well, the extreme part of me would probably train like 3 hours a day to learn the techniques, to master the techniques. But I'm trying to pace myself because I know it's just going to do more harm than good. But training is even worse because high effort training imposes a strong stress on many tissues in the body. Now, if you want to build muscle, okay, look at those who get the most muscle, and especially probably those who are natural, because drugs do change physiology, which changes the way their body responds to stress and how much stress it can sustain. And the fact is that, yeah, you do have some people training for 2 hours, but it's probably because they are like taking very long rest periods. Uh, I always give the example of a fireman and a police officer that were training in the gym I was working at. They would be in the building called the gym for 3 hours, but in that time, they would probably do like 5 sets. They would talk, they would read the paper, they would go talk to that girl over there. So the amount of time spent in the gym is actually irrelevant to the type of gains you're getting. So for example, right now, I would say my workouts last probably 40 minutes. My lifting workouts, probably 40 minutes. Because I'm using a lower volume, higher effort approach. Because well, I just don't need the extra volume. If I push each of the set really, really hard, I don't need it. So if we need to understand that doing okay, we've been programmed to think that if we work more, we get better salaries. We study more, we get better grades. More effort means more results. So we tend to translate that to training. That the more I train, the heavier I go, the more I gain. And it's not really the case. Yeah, you should strive to gradually become better and better and better as the week progresses. So that means probably trying to load more weight while maintaining good form and mechanics. Uh, but that doesn't mean doing a shit ton of work in that building zone. The body has a limited capacity to recover from physical stress. And if you over stress your body, what can happen is you're going to cause too much muscle damage for you to recover from, which will either very much limit the amount of muscle you gain, or in a worst case scenario, it actually lose some muscle because you will not only you create so much damage, you cannot even repair the muscle fiber. You need to regenerate it, which is a much longer process, and that fiber will be smaller than the previous one. So certainly, doing too much work is not the answer. Okay. So personally, what I recommend, and I mentioned that earlier, I tend to recommend 4 to 6 exercises in a workout. Now, the volume will obviously depend on the approach you're using. If you're doing a volume-based approach, which is like doing more volume to get the amount of work or stimulatory work required, then that might come up to something like 3 to 5 work set per exercise. Okay? And you probably will gradually increase it over the course of a training cycle. So, for example, you might start with 3 sets, and at the end of a training cycle, like 8 to 10 weeks later, you're at 5 sets per exercise, for example, okay? Because there's a progression there. If you're using more of an effort, and these sets, by the way, would need to be like 1 or 2 reps short of failure. If you go to failure on all these sets, you will just not recover. It's just too much physical stress. Now, if you are using a lower volume approach, which is what I personally am using now, or what I call an effort-based approach, then now you would have 1 or 2 really hard work set per exercise, meaning you go to failure or maybe even beyond failure by adding something like a rest pause, drop set, or whatever. Now, the way this works is you are maximizing the amount of effective work in each set. Because you're maximizing it, you don't need as many sets. In 2 sets, failure and beyond, you can get as much stimulation as for 5 sets where you stop 2 reps short of failure, for example. Okay, so it's not just the amount of work you're doing; it's the amount of effective work you're doing. So certainly, first of all, stop thinking in terms of time spent in the gym. That has no correlation with the gains you're going to be getting. And don't try to do more work because you think more work is going to be better. It's not. It's not. Focus on doing the proper amount of work, the amount of work you can recover from and grow from. If you train hard, I mean, when I say train hard, is that your work sets are close to the limit or to the limit, which is the main reason why people are not gaining muscle, by the way. Most people just don't train hard because it's painful, it's uncomfortable. I'm going to paraphrase a bodybuilder named Jordan Peters, who is a freaking mass monster and strong at heck. Okay? And Jordan Peters said that he only has 1 top set per exercise, like Dorian Yates did. He might do like 2 to 3 warm-up sets, gradually heavier. Then he has 1 top set where he gives everything he has. And he says, on that top set, I'm looking to see God, meaning that you're working until you basically have tunnel vision and just lose yourself in a moment. That's the kind of effort that will make that set effective. That most people in gyms just don't train hard. They train a lot. They do train a lot. They do plenty of sets, but they don't train hard, meaning that none of these sets are taken close to the limit. As a result, they just pile up work, pile up work, pile up work, which has a negative impact on hormones and recovery without having much stimulatory work. Okay, so the first skill you need to develop is not the first thing you need to look at is not how much work can I do today, it's how hard can I push today. And the reality is, if you push yourself brutally hard on those work sets, it's very, very hard to undertrain, like not train enough to grow. Okay. But it's very easy to overtrain if you just focus on doing more and more and more volume. So first get things in order. Just learn to train freaking hard with less work. And if you find you can recover, you might gradually, very gradually add work. But quality of work, quality of effort is what you should be looking for. Not the amount of time you spend in the gym or just loading like crazy. All right. Do you ever incorporate isometrics into hypertrophy program? Yes. Traditionally, I don't often use pure isometrics. I mean, just for the sake of conversation, I'm going to explain the different types of isometric. So let me speak the same language. The first type of isometric is called overcoming isometric, which is the typical isometric we think of. It's pushing or pulling against something that can't be moved. Well, let's say you are in a power rack, you set the bar just above the knees and you try to deadlift it, but it's under the pin, so you cannot lift the rack. It doesn't move. Pull it as hard as you can. That's overcoming isometric. You try to overcome a resistance, but it just cannot be moved. The second type of isometric is called yielding isometric, which is another form that is quite easy, like I wouldn't say popular, but you see it pretty often, is you're holding a weight. You're holding a weight, preventing it from dropping down. Let's say you do a curl and you just hold the mid-range position as long as possible before it drops down. It's called yielding because you're trying to avoid yielding the weight. Okay, both are different. The overcoming isometrics would be better done for very high effort level, so maximum intensity, maximum pushing as hard as you can for a very short duration, like 3 to 6 seconds. And it's mostly a strength building method. So I wouldn't really use it on hypertrophy except for some cases I'm going to mention in a moment. More useful, for example, if you need to fix a weak point in the lift. So let's say that you are weak below the knees on deadlift, you might do overcoming isometrics from that position to strengthen that specific part of the range of motion. Because with isometrics, especially overcoming isometrics, the strength gains are position specific or joint angle specific. Okay, yielding isometrics are best done for duration. So sets lasting 30 70 seconds, for example. Thus, they would be better suited for hypertrophy. Okay, so that would be your two main types of isometrics. The third one, which is the one I use the most, is called statodynamic. Statodynamic means that you are combining a static or isometric move exercise or portion and a dynamic portion in your exercise. For example, you could do a squat or let's say a bench. You're bench pressing, and when the bar is let's say 3 inches from the chest, you hold for 3 seconds, then you finish the eccentric, and then you do that on every single rep. That would be a statodynamic contraction. Okay, including adding an isometric at some specific part in the range of motion. You can also do it before you're doing your work. So, for example, let's say that you have problems feeling your glutes. Okay, let's say glutes. Well, you're going to use a hip thrust, and then you go at the top of the hip thrust, squeeze your glutes as hard as you can, okay? And hold that position for 20, 30 seconds, focusing exclusively on squeezing those glutes as hard as humanly possible. Once the 20 to 30 seconds are done, then you do your 6 to 8 reps. What happens is the 30 seconds you spend actively contracting your glutes will make them more sensitive to the activation. It will also create some uh, pump, so that will increase the sensation of your glutes. That's what hand feedback. That will allow you to better recruit, better feel that muscle while doing the hip thrust. Same thing, for example, if you can't feel your lats, do a row, okay, and at the peak contraction, squeeze your lats as hard as you can. Focus only on that for 20 seconds, then do your reps. You will have much more ease at contracting and feeling your lats than if you just did yourself. That would be a second application of statodynamic for hypertrophy. In that case, to make the exercise more effective at creating tension in the target muscle. A third application of statodynamic would be post-fatigue statodynamic. That's a lot of work. For example, you're doing dumbbell bench press. And again, I'm reading failure or close to it. Okay, I know I can't do one more rep. I'm going to lower down and hold the low position for as long as tolerable, contracting those muscles against tension. That prolongs the time the muscle is creating tension, and tension is the main driver for hypertrophy. So if you're shooting to use isometrics mostly for hypertrophy, these are the methods you want to be using the most. It would be either pre-fatigue statodynamic or post-fatigue statodynamic. Uh, Regularly intra-rep statodynamics, a pause on every rep, would be more of a strength building method. So you do the pause on your squat or bench press at your weakest position to strengthen that position more. It'd be more of a strength method. Another way to use isometric, and I don't use it as much, but it's something you could use if you have like a lagging muscle that you have a hard time feeling. Let's say you're doing lateral raise. Let's say you want to build your delts. You're going to start by doing dumbbell lateral raises or machine lateral raises, whatever you float your boat. Okay, and once you hit or close to it, you would move to a doorway or something that is similar, like two posts, and you're going to try to. And you've done this as a kid. You stand in the doorway and you try to push the door, the side of the door open, and like most machines have posts. I can just put my hands in and try to break open the machine. And I would hold that position either for, let's say, 20, 30 seconds, pushing as hard as I can, or using pulses. 3 seconds, relax. 3 seconds, relax. That would be another way to use isometrics. That's still post-fatigue isometrics, but using different approaches. Lastly, you could use isometrics either overcoming or yielding, probably more overcoming, as an activation tool. If you're training a muscle and you want to feel it better, well, you can do like 2 or 3 sets of 6 seconds of uh, overcoming isometrics for that muscle to better feel. So these would be the application of isometrics or derivative of isometrics specifically for hypertrophy. Good question. All right. Coach, are you a believer in mind muscle connection with every rep and tensing as your rep during the movement? Yes and no. Okay. I am absolutely on board with mind muscle connection, but not necessarily for the reason that people believe. And I would not go as far as to flex the muscle as hard as you can. Okay. On some exercises, I will recommend that, depending on the purpose. But on let's say on multi-joint exercises, either on a machine or freeway, doesn't matter. I don't focus on squeezing that muscle as hard as you can. Just try to find the position, the angle, the motion that allows you to feel that muscle contracting. Okay? Here's my logic. Uh, we know that muscle tension, mechanical tension, is the main driver of hypertrophy. You need strong tension to produce the muscle against resistance to trigger the growth processes. Right? We know that. So when I'm lifting a weight, if the muscle is contracting to lift the weight, I should feel it. Like just stand there and just flex your bicep. Or I try to push your bicep away and flex your bicep. You will feel your bicep. So if you're doing a curl movement and you don't feel your bicep, there might be something wrong from a technique perspective. You probably are overusing some other muscles that lead to under contracting the bicep in the exercise is effective. So the way to me is I use muscle sensation, what people call muscle connection, to make micro adjustments. Like for example, yesterday I was training with my friend. We're doing single arm lat pull down, and we're doing pull down here, and I was fully upright here, and I just could not feel my lats. I couldn't. I just tried to lean slightly sideways, a little bit back, and boom, it was all lats. Okay, very, very small difference. In fact, if you don't know what I was doing, you probably did not see that much of a difference. But that's where, to me, mind muscle connection is important, is to make, during those sets, micro adjustment to make sure that you are loading the proper muscle. Okay? It's more of a feedback whether you are doing the technique properly. Because here's the tricky thing with exercise technique and biomechanically optimal exercise. Okay? Uh, the human body is not just biomechanics; it's neurology, it's muscle biases. Some people have different levers, for example, and the fact is that there's no like universal technique on an exercise that will make that movement perfect for everyone. Most people will need to make small tweaks just to get a slightly better effect, but that will make a big difference in the long run. Okay? So that's where mind muscle connection is important to be able to make those tweaks because a coach can't make that for you because he has his own experience, his own belief about what works, but he's not inside your body. So you might recommend an adjustment that actually takes away the muscle tension. So I believe in mind muscle connection only as a way to know if you are utilizing the best mechanic for your body on that exercise. I don't believe in voluntarily flexing that muscle as hard as you can. Now, there are some exceptions. There are some cases where I will do that. But most of the time, I don't do that because it minimizes lifting performance. Ironically, it actually minimizes muscle tension. Yeah, you're creating tension by squeezing, but it's not against resistance. That's not real tension. It doesn't have the same effect as tension against the weight. You need to have a high tension because you're lifting a heavy weight that for you for that movement. And just flexing doesn't. I'm not saying it doesn't have an effect, but it detracts from the execution of the exercise in most cases. The one time I will use that is if someone needs to fix a weak point and he just has problem feeding a muscle, regardless of the changing of technique or whatever. And mostly I would only use that on single joint exercise. Instead of doing a squat. I can't tell someone to flex your quads. That doesn't work on try it. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. It's a compound movement. There are more than one muscle being involved. If I'm doing a curl, I can do it. I can't feel my biceps. Well, Okay, don't use weight, just flex your bicep from and feel it. Yeah, I can feel it. Do that now when lifting weight. So it just programs the brain to be able to recruit that muscle. So it's a tool I'm using not to build hypertrophy, but to build muscle control, which will improve their lifting performance. Hopefully that answers your question. I'm a physio in New York. What do you think physio can learn from strength coaches and vice versa? Reverse work with Dr. John Wilson. Good question. The thing is, it's kind of hard to make a broad recommendation because not all physios are the same. Not all strength coaches are the same. But certainly, I think it depends on the population you're working with. What I think that coaches can learn from physical therapists would be the proper muscle functions and also how to target those harder to recruit muscles. There's also plenty of techniques, like for example, mobility technique, like that could be useful for strength coaches. As far as really, I think the most important thing for both camps is, I mean, understand what the other person is doing. From my own experience, the best relationship I had with physical therapists or chiropractors in that regard, or when we had a very good working relationship. He knew the way I was working, he knew my principles, and I knew what he was doing. So I think that not so much as there are some tools I need to learn from that physio or from that trainer, as much as I need to understand what he's trying to accomplish with the body. Is it neurological? Is it muscular? Is it soft tissue? And I need to try to adapt my interactions with my client as to work alongside with them. Sorry if I can't give you a better answer. I mean, there's plenty of physical therapists I learned a lot from, and vice versa. The best example would be my good friend Melindova, who actually has a website and certification organization called Rehab U. We actually gave seminars together. We worked together in the past. Good friend. Um, she started using, okay, when I train athletes. I use what's called the omni contraction training system, meaning that I train eccentric, isometrics, and concentric and plyometric in every single training phase. Now, obviously, there will be a periodization in the methods I'm using for each type of contraction. The goal is being from structural work to high effort to high speed in all four contraction types. Anyway, so she started using that in rehab, like lots of eccentric, lots of isometrics, some plyometrics. So, and she actually has something really smart to say is that rehab is training. The best physical therapists I've worked with are those who see physical therapy as training, not just rehabbing you. I have a question on the Vimo account, which never happens. How do you manage trade-off between spreading tension across multiple muscle with the big compound movement versus creating a relatively higher tension in the individual muscle with isolation movement, but now you start needing more movement and volume? Okay. First, very rarely will you do only one exercise per muscle, unless you're using a whole body approach. So I'm not saying your question is moot, but it's not as dramatic as you make it sound. I mean, to hit a muscle properly, okay, even a complex muscle, you probably don't need more than two exercises. For look at the back, you tend to see why there's need more than two back exercises. Sure, but the back is several muscles. Like you, lats, you have rear delts, you have upper back rhomboids, all that stuff. So yeah, you might need more exercises for the back complex. Uh, but in reality, you only need one or two muscles per section. And for the whole back, like normally, three exercises can do the job very well. Now, on some exercises, yeah, there are some biases, for example, and spreading of the move of the division of the muscles. For example, if I'm doing a bench press, yeah, I'm doing chest work, but I'm doing delt and tricep involved. Uh, but if you do on a machine chest press, and it's much easier to focus solely on pectorals. And again, uh, I'm, you can't, okay, the amount of spreading around on an exercise often depends on your mechanics. Obviously, a squat, you cannot really change uh, the fact that many muscles are using. But on a chest press or double press, there's a way to focus almost exclusively on your pectorals. Trying to you lift up and you try to lift up your pectorals with your arms here, minimize the shoulders and tricep. I have a video on that on my Instagram account. So it's not, the difference is not as large as you. Now, personally, the way I see it, and I'm going to give you the real answer I'm giving people, okay, is that the exercise strategy you're using or exercise selection will depend on how easily you develop a certain muscle. So, for example, if your chest grows very easily, then you don't need to rely on monoarticular exercise or single joint movement just for that muscle. You probably don't need that much cable flies or crossover. Maybe once in a while, but if the chest is a very easy responder, it probably is going to grow just from doing compound movement. On the other end of the spectrum, if your shoulders are very dominant, your triceps are very dominant, and you just can't get your chest to grow, then it likely needs more focused work and uh, less multi-joint work because you're obviously compensating by stronger muscles. So it really depends on the muscles that are easier or harder to develop. The easier a muscle is to develop for you, the heavier you can go, the more multi-joint you can go, the more free weight you can go, the more bilateral you can go. The harder it is for you to make a muscle grow, the more single joint you should go, the more machine or pulley you should go, the more unilateral work you should involve, the more controlled your movement should become. It's part of a lot all-encompassing strategy. It's a good exercise selection. All right. Opinion on here, yes. Opinion on forced eccentrics negative to failure after working reps. I've used it. I mean, I do have a video on Instagram where I'm doing a session. I'm doing, I think, it's a inclined chest press machine. So I'm doing, let's say, heavy work, let's say 6 reps. Then after that, we continue doing, I continue doing the eccentric on my partner helps me out. And I do reps until I can't lower the weight anymore. And that's a very intense method. Very, that of all the intensifiers you can do, that's one of the hardest ones. The only one that would be more traumatic on the body would be doing a rest pause, then doing the negative. For example, you would do, let's say, 6 reps to failure, you rest 20 seconds, you get 3 more reps to failure, then you add 3 to 5 eccentrics with the partner helping you out on the concentric. That would be like literally the pinnacle of training stress for one set. Okay. Now here's the thing: these methods are indeed powerful in that one set can give you a large amount of growth stimulation, but it's also tremendously stressful in the body, and the eccentric especially will cause more muscle damage. And as I mentioned earlier in this podcast, too much muscle damage can actually decrease muscle and lead to muscle loss, in fact. Okay? So it's certainly not something you would like to use all the time. The way I use intensifiers, and actually I just came up with, it's not out yet, but I've seen the almost final version. It's going to be published on T Nation soon. It's an intensity based training cycle, meaning that every week, in reality, it could be every 1 to 3 weeks. We go up on the intensity scale by adding a more intense intensifier. So, for example, week 1 we should just go a top set to failure. Week 2 could be top set to failure with a drop set. You go to failure with 6 reps, you drop the weight, you get 6 more reps, for example. Third week, we do a rest pause. Fourth week, we do a double rest pause. Fifth week, then you can do, for example, the force eccentric. So it's a gradual increase than you would have a deload period. Okay. So, but the force eccentrics are effective. They are very effective. But I certainly would not do that for more than 2, maybe 3 weeks, and it's like one work set per exercise or per muscle. All right. I feel a real intense pump and burn on muscle instead the metabolite or IGF-1 in the muscle. How many times a week do we need to get a pump? on muscle group. Okay, first the pump itself. Okay, it's theorized that it might have a small impact on hypertrophy. The theory is that by creating a pump, expanding muscle, creating pressure around the envelope, which has receptors, and it sends a signal to create more muscle, like increase protein synthesis. That's the theory. Okay? In reality, the pump itself is not necessarily a stimulus for growth. For example, if you do, let's say, just take a very small weight and do 200 curls, you will get a nasty pump, but it probably won't grow anymore. Okay? You need mechanical loading, heavy, high tension on your muscles. So the pump is a side effect of a certain type of physical loading that typically is in part due to a building up of metabolites like lactate, like hydrogen ions, also increasing blood volume, increasing uh, other type of like fluids inside the muscle. Because when you're pumping the muscle up and you're doing contraction, you have water shift, for example, uh, you have inflammation, whatever. Yeah, so all that stuff can contribute to the pump. It's multifactorial. Uh, but it's not a matter of I need to pump to grow. No, you can get growth if you impose a high level of muscle tension with a high effort work, like going to failure or close to it. Even if you don't get a nasty pump, it does not mean that you will not grow. Obviously, a pump is fun, and I'm not discounting its effect. I'm just saying that you should focus on I need my muscles to be pumped twice a week to make them grow. No, it doesn't work like that. Are sets with up to 15 reps unnecessary and jog volume for natural? Uh, I want to tell you yes, okay, but in some cases it might be warranted. I'm going to explain myself. Now, the main driver of hypertrophy, as we mentioned, is the amount of mechanical tension produced by the muscle. And then it's to accumulate enough high tension repetitions, which tend to be the last 5 reps of a set. These would be effective. So I often say that if you do 6 reps to failure, you're going to have 5 effective reps. If you do 10 reps to failure, you're going to have 5 effective reps. If you do 30 reps to failure, you're going to have 5 effective reps. So all the other reps in your set are mostly pre-fatigue repetitions. So strictly from an hypertrophy perspective, there's no real need to go higher than 6 to 8 reps if you train to failure or close to it. If you stop 1 or 2 reps short of failure, you might need to go up to 10. Okay, but there's no real need to go higher than that from a muscle building perspective, at least for the main driver of hypertrophy, which is mechanical tension. Now, that's the easy answer. The more complex and truthful one is that it depends. There are some cases where higher reps can have side effects, positive side effects, or secondary effects that will be beneficial and that might be worth doing. So, for example, if you are a hockey player and your shifts tend to produce lots of lactate. Okay? So you need to be able to tolerate lactate, okay, or the acidification of the muscle milieu. So by doing sets of 15 reps or a set lasting 60, 70 seconds, you train in that lactic zone. By the way, the pain is not the lactate, it's the hydrogen ions that come with the lactate, but that's besides the point. So by training often in that zone, you eventually build up a tolerance for it. It still hurts, but there is no inhibition that comes with it. So the reason why, okay, once you have that painful lactate feeling in a muscle, it sends a signal to the brain that something bad is happening, and the body to protect yourself against it, it will inhibit the strength of the nervous system. That's called central fatigue. But the more used to a certain feeling, sensation, pain, discomfort you are, the less your nervous system think it's dangerous. Even though you're still receiving information, it's still painful. You have not the same weakening of the central drive. So if you're an athlete that requires to be tolerant to lactate or lactic acid or whatever happens when you have that lactate zone, then training hypertrophy for higher reps might actually be beneficial for your sport. Okay, so that would be an example. Another case would be the release of growth factors. A higher repetition that leads to an increase in lactate will tend to increase the production of local growth factors, IGF-1, like MGF, stuff like that, that can have an impact on protein synthesis. Now, it's not as strong as mechanical tension to produce hypertrophy. I always give the example of growing a plant or growing crops. When you want a plant to grow, you need the fertile soil, you need the sun and water. That's your mechanical tension. That's the main driver. Without it, you don't grow. If you add fertilizer to that mix, the plant grow faster. Okay? But if you only put fertilizer, no soil, no water, no sun, the plant won't grow. Same thing with growth factor training. If you add one or two steps of higher reps or longer duration and stuff at the end of a workout, once the mechanical tension has been accumulated, okay, or mechanical stress has been accumulated and triggered hypertrophy, you do growth factor work at the end that might give you a slight benefit from a protein synthesis standpoint and magnify the response that you created during the early portion of the workout. But if that's all you do, then you will certainly not grow as much as if you focus on mechanical tension. And obviously, the downside of doing higher reps is that it requires more mechanical work, more energy expenditure, which might be seen as a positive from a calorie burning standpoint, but it also comes with higher cortisol level, higher adrenaline level, might be improving your health. Hopefully, it's some of it. Also, eccentric tempo reps build more muscle. How slow should I lower the weight and try to always push the concentric as fast as possible? Uh, yes, with an asterisk. Slow eccentric, uh, as long as it's reasonable speed, that does not decrease your capacity to perform the concentric, will lead to more hypertrophy. For example, if you use a true 3 seconds eccentric, 1, 2, 3, which is much slower than you think. Most people think I'm doing my weight in 3 seconds. In reality, really count it, it's like 1 second, if that. But a real 3 seconds is actually fairly slow. It's probably not slow enough to decrease your capacity to lift the concentric. But if I'm lowering in 6 seconds, I'm probably going to have to lower the weight, making the concentric less effective. Uh, so it's, yeah, the concentric, slow concentric is better than a fast eccentric. Like but slower is not necessarily better. Under control is better. The goal is that a slightly slower eccentric allows you to keep the tension on the muscle. If you go fast, the muscle relaxes to allow the speed. Okay? And what creates growth is mechanical tension. So if you are going fast, you lose the mechanical tension. Okay? By losing the mechanical tension, you make the eccentric less effective. But if I'm going too slow, it might make the rest of the movement less effective. That having been said, I do use slower eccentrics with athletes, oftentimes as slow as 6 seconds. Okay, but the reason is not to build muscle; it's to build technical efficiency. So, for example, with athletes, I will start them on what's called an accumulation phase. And the real goal of an accumulation phase is to prepare the body for the more intense loading to come. So, let's say that for an athlete, my goal is to load the squat heavy, for example. Okay, well, I cannot have them squat heavy right from the start. I need to prepare the body. So that means strengthening the tendon. It means making sure that technique is optimal, making sure that I can keep a rigid position as I'm squatting down. Because once I'm heavy loading, if I'm not rigid, I'm going to bend forward, bend backward, sideways, and it's going to be dangerous, right? And also need some muscle. So the slow eccentric that I use earlier on in the training phase is mostly to make sure that technique is solid, that you can stay rigid all the time, you can control the weight. So when you move up to heavy lifting, your body is prepared for it. There's also a thing that slow eccentrics are slightly better to develop tendons, so that can also prepare you for the heavy lifter to come. But for hypertrophy, I simply focus on controlling eccentric, so you can keep the tension on that muscle. Now, as far as a fast concentric, yes, but no. If you try to explode like crazy, you will create momentum. Momentum means that once the momentum has been created, the muscle does not contract as hard anymore to move the weight. So you're reducing tension, reducing growth stimulation. But going slow on purpose will make you lift less weight and recruit less fast twitch fibers. So you're looking for the best image I can give you. It's a powerful drive. It's like a plane taking off. And you start slower as you lift, you build up speed. Build up speed. You need to go until the weight gets very slow. Not because you're trying, but because for TH. If I'm going explosive from the bottom, that basically negate the effectiveness of fire purpose. All right. How do I improve agility while being big? I keep getting slower as I get bigger with bodybuilding. Well, that's a given. That's, I mean, think about it this way. It's not just a matter of being stronger, but especially if you become top heavy, like you build a big upper body, when you're trying to shift laterally, you need to stop the momentum of your body moving sideways. So now that's a lot of stress on decelerating, absorption force, and changing direction. So people say, well, I'm bigger, but my legs are stronger. No, but it's not just that. It's just actually the whole upper body, which is super heavy now, it just creates more display, more momentum sideways. It might not look like that, but that's what's happening. So from a positional standpoint, you get out of position with a weaker position to push off from. It also requires more energy to get back. So honestly, there is not much you can do to avoid that besides always practicing agility as you are gaining weight, not waiting to practice agility once you're big. But even then, there's a limit. Best example would be an example I can give you is a football receiver called David Boston. Obviously, like in the early 2000, was playing for the Arizona Cardinal at first. So receiver, I don't know if you know American football, anyway, was catching balls and running routes and had a quick shift, quick change of direction. He was 6'2", 205, 209 in his first year. And he was a decent player. Then, like Charles Clayton, and the next year, he was 6'2", 235, and freaking lean. Okay, don't know what he did. I'm pretty sure it was not all legal. But anyway, he gained at least like 30 pounds of muscle because he was now leaner. And that actually made him a dominant player, a very dominant player. But he fell in love with the muscular look. Next year, he came in as 255, still freaking lean, okay? But he just lost a step and he got injured. So why? Because his upper body was so big, when he was doing his cut, it created shearing force to stop that momentum and slow him down and creating lots of strain on the knee. Now, there are some big, agile people, and these are people who are naturally big, so they're born to be that way. But going from smaller to big, it's very unusual to maintain the same level of agility. Okay? So at some point, you do need to make a choice. The best, if you want to stay muscular and gain agility, well, first thing is lose fat. Lose as much fat as you can. If you gain 10 pounds of muscle but lose 10 pounds of fat, you have the same amount of weight to stop. So that should kind of balance itself out. But it's if you gain a lot of muscle, you will probably lose a step. I mean, agility wise, speed is not as impacted because speed is linear force per power production, so it doesn't have all that shit that you need to overcome. But certainly, agility is negatively impacted by body size, especially upper body size. The more top heavy you are, the more weight you have above your waist, the less agile you're going to be. That's just the way it is. All right, I have time for one more question. A set of around 6 reps or 80% gives you maximally effective reps according to volume. How do you make that concept work for hard to load exercise like forearms, calves raise, reverse flies? That's a good question, and that would be one exception I failed to mention. I will use higher reps on shorter range of motion exercises. It's not so much that they are harder to tense or load, it's because the exercises or the muscles you mentioned have normally a short range of motion. And for a short range of motion, the amount of mechanical tension and mechanical work for the full range of the rep is much smaller than a normal rep. For example, if I'm doing, let's say, a chest press and the pec has to contract for a range of motion of around a foot and a half versus a calf raise where I probably have a range of motion of 4 inches, Each rep does not provide the same amount of mechanical stimulus. It just doesn't, because it doesn't work for as long over the same. So one thing you could do is slow down the reps, but then again, that will come at the point of decreasing the load. So you could increase the number of repetition when the range of motion is shorter. I personally would not go as far as rear delts. I still load the rear delts pretty heavy because I can feel them pretty good. But certainly on muscles with a short range of motion, I do recommend higher reps just because we need to equate the amount of mechanical tension being performed. Guys, I really appreciated your question. It was awesome today. I really loved it. Hopefully, it was enjoyable for you too. So remember, we have these every Thursday at 11 p.m. Eastern Time. Tell your friends, because the more questions we have, the more interesting it's going to get. And obviously, the more people there is, the more questions we're going to have. So it's all up to you to make this as fun as possible and as useful as possible. Hopefully, I see you there next week along with your friends. Take care, guys.